Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 439 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Eilon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and an author. Our fifth book just came out. It's called Perseverance and How to Be a Great Fraternity or Sorority Alumnus. So go and pick up that book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring college students together. Fun fact, I do love talking about happiness because I think finding it can be so difficult for college students given social media, the pandemic, politics, the finances of higher education, and I can go on and on. In the annual Healthy Mind Survey, this received responses from 96,000 US students across 133 campuses during the 2021-2022 academic year. The survey said that 44% of the students reported symptoms of depression, 37% said that they experienced anxiety, and 15% said that they have seriously considered suicide. These are the highest rates in the survey's 15-year history. So it is absolutely time to be talking about mental health. It is time to be talking about happiness, and we are going to be doing that with our next guest. Rob Dubin is an international keynote speaker and an Amazon #1 best-selling author on happiness and employee engagement. His TEDx talk on happiness has been viewed over 250,000 times. Rob was an award-winning filmmaker who traveled the world making TV programs and commercials for Fortune 500 companies. He's also a serial entrepreneur, just like me, who created multiple seven-figure businesses. After a near-death survival experience that would have sidelined most people, Rob bounced back more resilient than ever. At the age of 42, he and his wife sold their home, moved onto a 40-foot sailboat, and spent the next 17 years sailing around the world studying human happiness and fulfillment. Given the ever-changing nature of life at sea, Rob learned firsthand the key traits of resilience. Today, Rob gives back by teaching courses in resilient leadership and employee happiness, which increase engagement and reduce burnout. Unbelievable. Welcome to the show, Rob.
Well, thank you for having me, Michael. And I just want to congratulate you on over 400 episodes of your podcast. That's quite impressive.
Thank you. Thank you. See, that's all about resilience. It's about consistency. And that's what I do. I show up every single time, and everything that I do, I really kind of play the long game with it. And I commit myself to certain things. And it's just become kind of just a part of who I am as a person. And, it's been largely very successful. So we're very honored to have you on the show. I think your story is just absolutely incredible. So I can think of no better topic for episode number 439 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. So we really appreciate you being here. I do want to talk a little bit about your background, and your story kind of starts in this episode where you were in a snowstorm during a backcountry ski trip in Aspen, Colorado. You were actually missing for days, and the entire country waited to hear your fate. How did you and your wife survive out in the elements for that long with no tent and no sleeping bag?
Well, it was actually one of the worst storms in Colorado history, and we had headed off to a backcountry cabin, and partway there the weather changed to where we couldn't see but a couple of feet in front of us, and we never found the cabin. And the storm was so severe that the rescue team, after the second day, they said our odds of survival were just 10%. And on the third day, they were ready to, they said they didn't want to be sending live rescuers after our dead bodies. And then on the fifth day, the sheriff said they were going to call off the search for us. And that was the day that we actually did make contact with the rescue team, just when they were about to call it all off. And we got out of the wilderness. And because this storm had been so severe, the news media had been reporting about it night after night. There were avalanches all over the state. And of course, when they heard about the lost skiers, the story had gone viral. So when we did get out, the very first phone call I got was from the President of the United States, congratulating us on our perseverance and our survival. And that's really what it was. You asked the question is how did we survive? And it's not the physical things. I mean, physically, yes, we could have frozen to death, and it was very challenging physically. We had almost no food, not enough water. But much more important was our mental state, and our mental state was very positive. We never doubted that we would get out. And so we were just completely optimistic and resilient. So the next mornings after we did get out, I was on the Today Show and Good Morning America and Fox and CNN and all the network morning shows. And when I was asked how we survived, I really said it was because we were optimistic and we were resilient. And people often think optimism, well, that's where you see the glass is half full rather than half empty. I don't think that's what it is, because sometimes the glass isn't half full. When the rescue team said we had a 10% chance of survival, they were basing that on having done many, many rescues of people out in conditions like that. So the glass wasn't half full. Maybe the glass was only 10% full. But for us, that's all that we focused on, was the full portion of the glass, the little bit we had going for us, our optimism, our resilience, our mental state, the gear that we did have with us, a little bit of water, a little tiny bit of food, ability to try and dig a snow cave when we could. So those were the things that really got us out, was that optimistic viewpoint. And I imagine most people can't really relate to the idea of being lost in a snowstorm. But I think almost everybody can relate to the idea of feeling lost at some period of time in their life, not knowing the way forward, what to do next, where to go, where the trail was. And I think we can all relate to that feeling of being lost. And so I'm hoping that the things that we learned can benefit other people maybe at this time in their life if they are feeling those kind of challenges. And so a lot of it is cultivating that optimism. And one thing I tell people to do is, when you're faced with a challenge, see the glass as it really is. Maybe the glass is 20% full or it's 10% full, and focus on the empty part of the glass, the challenge before you. But if you spend 10 minutes thinking about and focusing on the empty part of the glass, the test you have coming up, the challenge you have in your living situation at college or whatever it is, if you spend 10 minutes thinking about that, then spend 30 minutes, 3 times more time and energy focused on the solution. And if you just do this 3 to 1, if you focus 3 times more energy on the solution, you will find solutions to most of the problems in your life. So that's the one thing that we learned out there that I hope can benefit others.
Wow. That is just an incredible story. It reminds me of that saying, if you think you'll succeed or you think you'll fail, either way, you're right.
Absolutely, and
Um,
it's so much of it is in our heads. I mean, and certainly that's what we learned. We learned how to, and this applied, I learned this also when we started sailing, because most people, when we sailed around the world, people always talk about, being scared at sea or how, getting seasick and all that. And a friend of mine in the sailing world said, well, you have to learn to separate extremely uncomfortable from life-threatening. And a lot of times the things that we go through in our life are not really life-threatening. They're just extremely uncomfortable. And if we can persevere and just keep putting one foot in front of the other, we often get through them, as we did out there.
Unbelievable. I mean, it really took on a whole nother level, because it's not really where the story ends. I mean, you felt powerless when the doctor said that they were going to have surgery to remove your wife's feet and her fingers in order to save her life from gangrene. And you both decided to be happy in your subconscious mind the next morning. And you ultimately found this treatment that completely avoided the gangrene. So, what did that whole episode teach you?
Well, what happened, I mean, so, we got out of the wilderness after these 5 incredible days and nights. And, we were shivering so hard. At night, I thought I would crack a rib. It was unbelievably miserable and terrible. And then we got out, and then we were just this outpouring of love from our family and friends, and cards and letters from people all over the world congratulating us. And I mean, I remember I got a letter from a guy in prison who he compared the second chance that he was going to get when he got out of prison to the second chance that we then had at life, the way he saw it. And so we got all this outpouring of love, and we basked in that for about 2 or 3 days. But then after the third night, my wife was in the hospital with severe frostbite. Her feet were frozen solid. They were coal black and hard as a rock, and her fingers were almost the same. And the third night she was in the hospital, the doctors came to me and they told me they were going to have to amputate both of her feet. And then they said they would wait a few days and amputate all of her fingers. And I went home that night in a state of shock, and I opened the door to our house, and I happened to see a pair of my wife's running shoes there by the front door. And when I saw them, I had been on this emotional roller coaster now for days, and I just lost it at that moment. I collapsed on the floor. I lay there crying just uncontrollably all night long, trying to imagine what kind of future awaited us. My wife was going to lose her feet and all of her fingers, and there was nothing I could do to save her. But somehow when the morning sun came streaming in the window, I jumped up with a smile on my face, and I raced to the hospital to talk to my wife. And I told her she was going to have a complete recovery, and she hadn't heard anything from the doctors at that point. And so that's all that we focused on. And a couple hours later, the doctors came in to prep her for the surgery, and we just tore up the papers and we refused to sign the authorization for the surgery. And so we were at this kind of standoff with the doctors, but we had just decided that our optimism and our resilience had gotten us out of the wilderness. And so we were going to embrace those same two emotions and attitudes. And what had happened is sort of towards 5 in that morning that I lay there all night long, about 5 in the morning, my subconscious mind took over, and it did for me what it had been doing my entire life. It decided to be happy, not happy if she recovered or happy when she recovered. I just decided we were going to have happy lives as we had always had, and focused on our own happiness, regardless of what the outcome was. We did not know what the outcome would be. And we just decided to try and hope that resilience and optimism that had gotten us out of the wilderness might possibly lead to a better outcome. And so we had a little bit of a standoff with the doctors, but eventually I agreed with one of the doctors. He said, well, she doesn't have gangrene yet. He said she's definitely going to get it, and when it happens, we'll have to operate immediately to save her life. And I said, if she gets gangrene, I won't argue with you. I'll sign the papers immediately. And he said, well, she's going to get it, but she never did. And they treated her, they gave her incredible care. And my father's a doctor, so I have huge respect for the medical profession. All my first jobs when I was in high school were working in the hospital. So, and we're not religious, we're not very spiritual, we don't believe in alternative medicine. So it was none of those things. We just thought, well, she doesn't have gangrene yet, so let's just focus on the full part of the glass, the part that we could be optimistic about, and hope she doesn't get gangrene. And they treated her in a hyperbaric chamber like they use for scuba divers that get the bends. And she was in the hospital for 21 days. And she did a lot of things in her own head to help with her healing. And eventually it was a whole year of recovery. But a year after that morning that I had laid crying on the floor, we took a victory celebration trip to Mexico. And she was dancing on the sand on the beach in Cancun with 2 feet and 10 fingers and 9.5 toes.
Wow, just incredible. What a story. I mean, and then at age 42, now you and your wife, you sell your home, you move on to the 40-foot sailboat. You spend the next 17 years sailing around the world, studying human happiness. And in that process, you lived with all kinds of people from many different cultures all over the world. What did you learn about happiness and where personal growth comes from?
Well, we had a wonderful life. We had a career making movies. That was our business. We worked together in our production company. We did films for the Travel Channel and ESPN, and we got to travel all over the world for our work. I made ski movies, and so I skied helicopter skiing with cameras and whitewater rafting and sailing and America's Cup sailboats. So we had an incredible life already, but we still thought maybe there's more. and maybe there's more ways to make ourselves happy more of the time. And so that's when we sold our home and closed the business. And we intended to go sailing for 3 or 4 years and then come back to work. But the salt water corroded my watch and we lost track of time. And we were out there for 17 years.
That's so incredible. Good for you. I mean, not a lot of people get the opportunity to do the things that you've been able to do. And obviously, visualization is clearly very important for you. Why do you feel that that skill of visualization is so important?
Well, as a filmmaker, I was actually quite lucky. When I was in high school, I knew what I wanted to do. And when all my friends went off to join fraternities and go to liberal arts colleges, I went directly to a film school. I missed out on the Greek fraternity lifestyle, which I sort of regret in some ways. But I was very lucky that I was driven and I knew what I wanted to do, and most people don't. So a big part of that is figuring out your purpose. And I think there's three elements that go into figuring out your purpose. And the first is doing something you love, because one of the things that creates this deep kind of happiness, there's happiness of having an ice cream cone or a glass of wine or having sex or something like that, but it lasts a very short time. There's a deeper kind of happiness. Aristotle called it eudaimonia, eudaimonic happiness. And that's happiness that comes from fulfillment. And so we were looking for things that would deliver that fulfillment. And one way to find that is things that where you get into what's called flow state, something that you do that time just disappears. And you do it because you love it. And for me, that was a lot of things in the outdoors, sailing and skiing and all these passions that I have. So if you can figure out what you're good at, something that you do, and when you do it, time just seems to disappear and fly by and you don't notice it. Maybe something your friends ask you for help with because they recognize that you're gifted at that. So if you can find that thing for you, what that thing is, and then the second question is asking yourself, who will pay you to do that thing? And then, so imagine somebody who, say, loves to write poetry. Well, you might say, well, you can't make a living as a poet. That's a ridiculous thing to do. But if you find somebody who has a problem that you can solve with doing the thing you love, so if you love to write poetry, who can you solve a problem for? And who you could solve a problem for are, for instance, singers. They're looking for songwriters to write country western or pop songs or whatever it is. And so now you found something you love, you found somebody who you can solve a problem for by doing that, and then somebody who will pay you to do that. So if you can put those three things together, you can help find your purpose. And so we had found that. And so we continue to do things that put us in flow state. And one of those is long distance sailing is really good for putting you in a state where that time just disappears and you're totally absorbed in what you're doing. So we committed to doing a lot of that, and it made us happy. And all of the people doing the same thing in that sailing lifestyle were doing it to be happy. So we spent all our time with a huge number of people that woke up every morning not saying, how can I get this, get a good grade on this test or get the next promotion or, XYZ in my job or make money. They woke up every morning saying, what can I do today that's going to make me happy? And so that's what we focused on, and we learned a lot of the things that created happiness. And visualization is a big part of how you create that reality for yourself. So I visualized us out sailing. I visualized what kind of lifestyle it was. And as I said, I had made films, and some of the films I made were films of ski racers, and I filmed NFL football players and America's Cup sailors and world-class rock climbers and kayakers, and all of these people, they visualize so when a ski racer visualizes going through all the gates on the course before they do it, and that visualization is a way to help you achieve many, many things in your life.
Yeah, I've seen pilots do that as well. So it's really interesting in terms of where they need to go, and they're actually visualizing how they can do it with their hands, with their motions, and they're actually flying the plane. But meanwhile, both feet are firmly on the ground. They're just doing it in their head. Yeah, it's just it's incredible to see that across sports, across all kinds of disciplines.
And when you do that, you visualize not only doing the thing, but having done it. You take it
Yeah.
all the way to the conclusion, and that makes it more real in your mind. And there's brain science behind this. There's something called in your brain called your reticular activating system. And everybody can relate to this experience that I'll describe. You buy a new red truck, and suddenly you notice red Ford trucks everywhere you go
Yeah.
because you have a new red Ford truck. That's your reticular activating system. It kicks in. And so when you visualize yourself not only doing the event, but having completed it, what your life is now like after you've accomplished that thing, when you do that, you're kicking in your reticular activating system, and it helps you notice, just the way you notice the red truck, it helps you notice the things that will get you on your way to achieving that goal.
Amazing. Really nice stuff there. Now, I've made a ton of mistakes in my life. I got to tell you.
We all do.
So I guess that's the question. How do we rewrite the stories of our past failures?
Well, so I have a particular technique I teach, and I want to say I'm not a psychologist. If you have really severe trauma in your past, you should get the mental health help you need. But we all have stuff in our past that just doesn't go the way we want, that we then carry those stories around in our life, and it prevents us from taking that next step. Well, I failed at it the last time, so I better not try again. And people like you and myself that are serial entrepreneurs, we only got there from a whole bunch of failures.
Right.
The world is littered with people that are so successful, like Fred Smith, who started FedEx, and Colonel Sanders, who started Kentucky Fried Chicken. They failed hundreds of times before they succeeded.
Michael
And so
Jordan too.
yeah, exactly. And so I teach a technique where you imagine you're that event that didn't go well, and you're carrying this story around with you that is preventing you from taking the next step. And imagine it as if you're seeing it from an airliner at 40,000 feet. And then take that picture that's in your mind and make it a little bit blurry and make it kind of black and white. And so now you're looking at this event as if it's happening to somebody else, and you have no emotional attachment to it. So you've got to look at it not with the emotions that it normally brings up. Be very detached from it, and then ask yourself some different and better questions than you asked yourself the first time around when it happened. What else could this have mean? What is maybe something positive that eventually came out of it? I have a friend who was in a terrible accident, burned himself severely, ended up in the hospital for months, and he married the nurse. So, something eventually positive came out of that story. So, if you can ask yourself, what's something positive that came out of it? If nothing positive, at least what's a lesson you learned that you don't have to repeat in your life? And be grateful for that lesson so that you can go forward without repeating it. And so, if you do that, then you come up with a new story for that same event, and then stop telling that old story that you've told in your head a million times and start telling that new story over and over and over again. And we learned that because when we moved on to our little tiny sailboat, we sold a 2,800 square foot house and moved on to a 300 square foot sailboat, and there's not much room for stuff on a sailboat. You got to get rid of all your stuff. And so the only things that we could take with us on the boat were things that would help us sail better or live better on our new life on the boat. And we just didn't have room for any other baggage. And so we literally just threw it overboard. And so that's a perfect analogy for all of us, because we're all carrying this kind of baggage that isn't going to help us get to the next phase of our life. And so just do what we did, literally throw it overboard by using that method that I just described.
That's fantastic. Now, you and I love public speaking, and public speaking, as you know, is one of the things that people fear the most. There are people that would rather actually die than get up on stage, which is just for us, it's just kind of mind blowing. So, what if you've never done it before? What if you're a student and you want to speak on a stage, but you've just never done it? How do you overcome that fear and actually take that first step?
Well, a lot of people are familiar with the concept of imposter syndrome. And so you have to ask yourself, well, who am I to be up there speaking and all of this? And I guess it's a little bit easier for me at this stage of my life. I have some years and experiences and maybe some wisdom that came along with it. So I do get over that, but we all still get nervous. But here's the bottom line is the world needs your message. You know something that nobody else in the world does, and you don't have to be on top of the mountain. You just have to be, 100 yards ahead of the other person that you can help. And so there is somebody going through today what you went through last year, and they could benefit from your message. And once you understand that and really embrace that idea, you realize that when you step up on stage, it is not about you. It has nothing to do with you. It is 100% about the audience and how you can be there to serve them. And so when I realize it's all about the audience, I don't care if my fly's unzipped or whatever, I stumble over my words or whatever, because I'm there to serve the audience. And if I get a bunch of applause when I'm done, they're not applauding me, is my belief. They're applauding the message that I delivered to them. And if there's a standing ovation, they're applauding themselves for the transformation they have made in their own thinking because that message was valuable for them. So I just take myself out of the equation. That's how I do it.
That's really fascinating. I've never heard a speaker describe it quite like that, but it makes a lot of sense to me. So I love thinking about it that way. Now, the other thing is you're also an expert in retention, and I think that's really important, especially on college campuses right now. I mean, they're really trying to figure out how do we keep students and how do we can attract them, but then they end up leaving and not graduating, and that's a problem. So, what advice do you have in terms of retaining members of our organization, retaining members on campus, maybe even retaining employees?
Well, disengagement is comes from burnout and from being unhappy. So when you learn, there are a bunch of skills to happiness. The problem is we all think that when we check all the right boxes in life, we will be happy. And so, your audience are students, and they think, when I get a good grade on the test, when I get my diploma, when I graduate, when I get my first house, when I get that new job, when I get that good salary, when I get the corner office. And we all think that when we reach those milestones, happiness will fall out of the sky and land on our head. And it just doesn't happen that way. It's much easier to think that way when you're a student and you're young. But, I talked to, during the pandemic, it wasn't just young people that were quitting their jobs. It was managers that had reached the pinnacles. They had the corner office and the big salary, and they were still unhappy. And so what we first need to understand is something the psychologists call miswanting. And I just love that term, miswanting, because our brain tricks us into thinking all those things that I just described. When we want them and we get them, we will be happy. But in fact, they don't make the needle move very far. And your students probably know this. They think that if they get the next test and they get an A on the test, it's going to make them, if they're a 5 today, they're going to be a 10 on the scale of happiness. And in fact, it moves them from 5 to a 6.5. And a month later, they're back to where they were. So we miswant. We have a misunderstanding about happiness. But so that's the bad news. The good news is that happiness can be taught. So it doesn't happen when we check all those boxes, but just like you can learn to play the guitar or learn to play the piano or learn to play, tennis or skiing or whatever, you can learn the skills of happiness. And you do learn that the same way you learn everything else in your life. You go to school, you take some lessons, you take some classes, you watch some YouTube videos, however you get some information, some training, you get some happiness training. And then you practice the skills of happiness. There are actual skills, just like learning a backhand in tennis or learning how to carve a turn in skiing or play a chord on the guitar. You learn those skills, you practice those skills, and you get better and better at happiness. And when you have that higher level of happiness, all those other elements of life that tend to drag us down, that lead to that disengagement, that lead to leaving school, those things now go from giant mountains to little tiny speed bumps because you have this happiness and fulfillment as a basis in your life. And so when you fill your life with that kind of happiness and fulfillment, then those other problems, that doesn't make all your problems go away, but it makes them much easier to deal with because they're just not mountains anymore, they're molehills.
Mm. On a related question, I mean, I've certainly had some success in life. Again, I failed a million times. When you're a serial entrepreneur, like you said before, it's just a part of the game. And I have had business success. I'm always chasing business success. There's always another mountain for me to climb. And I don't often celebrate those wins that I've had. And so finding personal fulfillment is kind of difficult because I'm always thinking about the next mountain. So, how do you balance business success with personal fulfillment?
That's really the key. And I don't know that I have a really good answer. I will tell you the things that give long-term fulfillment. Early some of the techniques, as I said, they're skills. One of them is figuring out these flow states, things that you do, things that bring awe to your life, out in nature and things like that. So I have some skill set, and we'll talk about it, and you can put some stuff in the show notes where people can download a PDF that'll give them these skills. But what we found is the two things that keep on delivering fulfillment to you. So successful entrepreneurs like yourself and myself, we get fulfillment when we get to this one point, and then, like I say, then there's the next step.
Yeah.
And so you got to celebrate when you get to that first step and when you make a success and do that. But the ones that we found that deliver long term are gratitude and contribution. And I will tell you that my emotional state, where I spend 90% of my waking hours, is gratitude and love for my wife and for the life that we have. We celebrating our 41st anniversary this year, and but I spend almost all of my day being grateful for the life I have. And then the other one is contribution. And we went through kind of an interesting transition as we started sailing. When we first got on our boat, we were in what I like to call the don't die phase, where we were trying to figure out how to do everything safely and not sink the boat and not land on a reef and not get out in a bad storm. And so we were all focused totally inward on us. It was all of our focus was how to survive and do all these things. And we just focused on ourselves a lot, which was necessary. And then after maybe a year or two, when we had things figured out, we had what I kind of call a mutual benefit phase. We sailed to a lot of third world countries, and we always carried school supplies for kids and fish hooks to give to the men in some of these poor countries, or tools or batteries, things that they would want. We always carried sewing supplies that the women wanted. And I hate to sound sexist, but that's how a lot of those cultures are. And so we always carried these things, and it benefited them, but it also benefited us because they let us into their lives. We had incredible travel experiences and got to share things that we wouldn't. So we were benefiting each other. But then after that phase went on for a little while, we really entered a third phase, which was all about contribution. What could we contribute everywhere we went? And as I said, I never went to a regular college. I went to a film school, which was just as rigorous. It was a 3.5 year program of super rigorous, but I didn't get the college experience. But we sailed into a small town in Indonesia, kind of a medium-sized city, and we were met on the beach by a young woman who offered to be our guide around the city and translate and everything for us so she could practice her English. And this young woman was so bright and smart and had so much personality. If she had been in the US, she'd have been on a full ride to Harvard or wherever she wanted to go. And her parents made about $200 a year. And luckily, she had gotten a scholarship to their local university there, the teaching university. And so she was studying to be a teacher and practicing her English. And we were just so enamored with her, and she just had so much charisma and smarts that we kind of wanted to do something. We knew there must be so many other women like her. And certainly in third world countries, educating women is the most bang for your buck you can get in terms of changing their society. And so we were only in this city for about 10 days, but we met with the president of the university, and we talked to the other sailors, and we thought we'd raise a little money and maybe give some money to the university. And he agreed to waive all the entrance requirements for anybody that we would sponsor. And then we went to the headmasters of a couple of the large high schools, and we set up a scholarship criteria based on academic achievement and financial need. And then we went to all the other sailors who were like us, we are just itinerant sailors stopping for a little while in this place and then we're going to go on. But we know there's this continuous stream of sailors. We all tend to follow the same routes with the trade winds and everything. And we set up a way for all the sailors in the following years to contribute to this scholarship. And so we put this scholarship in place in, I think it was 2007. And we've now sent 29 kids through 5 years of college. And so, it's a teaching college. So many of them have graduated and gone back to their home villages where they're, being the next pebble in the pond and letting the ripples go out. So finding that a way to contribute to something larger than yourself was by far the best thing we've done and the best method we have found to continually find that fulfillment. And it doesn't stop me from looking for that next step in my speaking business,
Yeah, I think you found it. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's that contribution and it's the gratitude. Those two things are kind of those pieces that I need to work on in order to get that fulfillment. I'm always chasing the mountain. I don't stop to, thank my lucky stars and how fortunate I am with my family. My kids are just absolutely brilliant, and I also have a wonderful wife as well. So congrats to you on your anniversary with your wife. And they certainly make us better people. There's no question about that.
That is for sure. And
That is for
you're
sure.
giving back so much in what you're doing with your podcast. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what the whole speaking game and podcasting is all about. It's you're not speaking to hear your own voice. You're speaking because what you have to say can help somebody else.
Yeah, the best part was I was actually speaking 2 days ago at Campbell University in North Carolina, and literally, I mean, the fraternity, one of the fraternities, they grabbed me after the presentation and they said, "Please come out to dinner with us." And like, when that happens, you know that they really enjoyed the time together, and they didn't want me to leave. They refused to let me go. And so
That's
when that
terrific.
happens, you feel pretty good.
Yeah, I was speaking in Seattle, Tacoma last year, and my wife came on the trip with me, and we spent a couple extra days up there, traveling around, seeing sights. And she doesn't often come with me when I speak, but she got to be with me after my speech because every time now after I speak, I have people come up to me and say, "You just changed my life. You changed how I look at the world, and I'm going to focus on my own happiness, and you've changed my life." And she got to be standing next to me and hear that. And so it was really grateful. I was really grateful for that. And those are the moments for why we do it for sure.
100%, 100%. It sounds like the time when my son got to hear me speak for the first time on his college campus. He's a college freshman, and similar type experience. He had never seen me kind of in that light. He just
For
knew me as
sure.
dad.
That's terrific.
And then he sees me up there, rocking the crowd. He's like, "Who's that guy?"
Yeah, and all the other kids going, "Wow, you have a cool dad."
Yeah. And he never thought about me in that way. I can promise you that.
Oh, good for you. That's great.
It was a lot of fun. All right. Well, listen, we love good food here at the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. And I know you've been all over the world. So I can only imagine the cuisine that you and your wife have had over decades, right? And I know you're kind of in that Colorado Springs area. I mean, is there any good restaurant in Colorado Springs that I need to try out?
Well, actually, I'm not in Colorado Springs. I'm up at a small mountain town in the mountains of Colorado. And oh, this is funny because you just brought up two things that'll converge for this story.
All right.
So, when I first moved here, one of our friends had moved here a few years before us from Denver, and she's a poet, and she wrote a poem about moving to a town that was so small that it didn't have a sushi restaurant. And she does poetry readings all the time, and been around the campfire on river trips, and she always shares this poem. And so about a year ago, two sushi restaurants opened up in our town. So I told her she has to rewrite her poem. But one of the sushi restaurants is actually our favorite food because our favorite food was in Thailand, and now we have a sushi Thai restaurant here. So that's our favorite. But we have something when we traveled called the inverse price rule. And it meant that the cheaper the meal was, the better the food was, especially in Thailand. When you order the food in Thailand, you order the food in a little tiny hole in the wall restaurant, and you see the kid run out the back door right after you order, and he's going to the market to buy the stuff you just ordered so that they can cook it. So that's how fresh it is. And if you go to a big fancy restaurant, it's in the freezer. So it's frozen and it's been there for a day or two, like most restaurants in America. But so the inverse price rule, the cheaper it is, the fresher it is, and the better it is. And in Thailand, we would have just incredible meals for a couple of bucks. Last time I went to Thailand, somebody said, "How long are you there?" And I said, I didn't say I'm going to be here 6 days. I said 18 meals.
Yeah, you're just like me. I love Thai food, certainly love sushi as well. So I'll have to try out that Thai restaurant if I ever get to your small town that now has two sushi restaurants, not one,
Perfect.
two. All right. So if our student listeners, if they want to bring you to their college campus to speak, where should they go in order to connect with you?
Well, they can find me on my website, which is robdubin.com, and they can find me there. But also, if they are interested in a PDF, little ebook that will give them some of these strategies, these actual things you can do, just like learning the piano, some things you can learn how to be happier. If they want to text the word happier to 33777, they'll be able to download a free ebook that'll give them some strategies and some skills that'll help add some happiness and fulfillment to their lives.
That's fantastic. I'm going to make sure that they text that over to you. I'll put that in the show notes as well, so that way they can get that PDF document directly from you and go to his website. It's robdubin.com. So that way you can go and check out his TEDx talk and then book him to speak on your college campus. Because I tell you what, your topic is phenomenal. Happiness is something we all need a little bit more of. So thank you for
Uh,
what you do.
Yep, I love it when people get the message and decide to focus more on their own happiness, because once they focus on it, they find it.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. Well, thank you so much for sharing this with us. This has been great. To our listeners, if you enjoyed this talk with Rob Dubin, I want you to like it and I want you to share it with other college students that also need to find their happiness. Thanks so much for being here with us today, and we'll see you on another episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.